how one secret shattered my family and forced me from my home. I'm Evelina, 34 years old, and 15 years ago, my father threw me out of our home when he discovered I was pregnant. "What have you done?" he shouted, his face contorted with rage and disappointment. What my family never knew was the heartbreaking truth behind my pregnancy. They chose judgment over understanding, cruelty over compassion. Now, after 15 years of silence, they're coming to visit me and my son. They have no idea what awaits them, how their worlds will shatter when they see what their rejection created. In my brother's shadow, I always felt unseen, but it was this invisibility that led me to my destiny. I grew up in a close-knit, traditional family in a quiet town, far from the bustling city. My father, Bartholomew, wasn't just any dad. He was a pillar of our community, an elder at the local church, and the proud owner of Bartholomew's Fine Construction, a company he had built from nothing. People respected him, sought his advice, and held him up as the quintessential family man. My mother, Serafina, was everything a traditional wife and mother was expected to be. She volunteered for every church event, kept our home immaculate, and somehow managed to have a gourmet meal on the table every evening at 6. Her apple pies won the county fair for years, and her rose garden was featured twice in the regional gardening magazine. She had this gentle laugh that made everyone around her feel at ease. Then there was my brother, Marcus, 2 years older than me and the undisputed golden child. He was the star athlete, an academic prodigy, and voted most likely to succeed in his senior yearbook. Dad would beam with pride at Marcus's games, his voice the loudest in the stands. "That's my boy!" he'd shout whenever Marcus made a good play. I'd sit there next to him, invisible, but always hoping for just a fraction of that enthusiasm directed my way. Our life looked perfect from the outside. The sprawling colonial house, with its pristine white fence, summer barbecues, Sunday church services, followed by elaborate brunches, and competitive family game nights. We were the family others aspired to be. At least, that's what everyone thought. This facade of perfection, however, hid deep fractures that would soon burst open. We were so young, but our love proved stronger than any obstacle, even death. I was 17 when I met Arthur Finch during my junior year in literature class. We were assigned as partners for a project on classic romances. Ironic, considering how our story would unfold. Arthur wasn't like the other boys at school. He was quiet, but confident, with thoughtful, earnest eyes that seemed to look right through all the high school pretense. The first time we studied together at the town library, we talked for 3 hours and barely touched our assignment. "You're different, Evelina," he told me that day. "You see things others miss." Arthur wasn't interested in the typical teenage stuff. While other kids were planning parties and obsessing over social status, he was volunteering at the animal sanctuary and writing poetry that made my heart skip. He played the cello with such passion that I could feel every note vibrate through me when he performed. We fell in love slowly, deliberately, with the kind of depth that seemed impossible for teenagers. We had so many dreams. Arthur was going to study music composition at a prestigious conservatory. He'd already been accepted with a partial scholarship. I was planning to attend a university for nursing, just a short distance from him. We talked about getting an apartment together after freshman year, about the trips we'd take during breaks, about the life we'd build. Everything seemed possible when we were together. Our relationship wasn't like most high school romances. Physical intimacy wasn't something we rushed into. Both raised in conservative households, we moved slowly, respecting boundaries and focusing on building something meaningful. My parents approved of Arthur, or at least they approved of what they knew about him. He was polite, academically successful, and came from a well-respected family. Dad would even joke that Arthur was the only boy he'd ever let near his daughter. Then, just after graduation, our world collapsed. The diagnosis that changed everything, how my beloved's illness forced us to make an unimaginable choice. What started as persistent fatigue and unusual bruising led to a diagnosis that shattered everything. Acute myeloid leukemia, an aggressive form that had already advanced significantly. Arthur had been feeling sick for months, but had attributed it to stress and senior year exhaustion. I still remember sitting in that sterile hospital room, holding his hand as the doctor explained treatment options, survival rates, and side effects. Arthur just nodded calmly, asking insightful questions, while I fought back tears. Later, when we were alone, he finally broke down. "I'm not afraid of dying, Ev," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm afraid of leaving nothing behind. Of being forgotten." The treatments began immediately. Aggressive chemotherapy ravaged his body, but failed to defeat the cancer completely. His curly brown hair fell out. His strong frame became gaunt. And some days, the pain was so intense, he could barely speak. But through it all, his spirit remained unbroken. During one particularly clear day between treatment cycles, Arthur brought up something we never seriously discussed before. "I want to leave something of myself in this world," he said, squeezing my hand. "If I don't make it, I want to know there's a part of me still here, still with you." We talked for hours about what he meant, about the possibility of creating a child together before he potentially died. It wasn't a decision we made lightly. We discussed every angle, every concern, every hope. This wasn't teenage recklessness. It was a profound response to mortality, a choice made from the deepest kind of love. When I discovered I was pregnant 2 months later, my emotions were chaos. Joy that a part of Arthur would live on. Terror about telling my strictly conservative parents. Sorrow that Arthur might never meet his child. But underlying everything was a certainty that we had created something beautiful amidst all the pain. I planned to tell my parents after figuring out exactly how to explain, to help them understand this wasn't about rebellion or poor choices, but about love and legacy in the face of devastating loss. I wanted Arthur with me when I told them, once he was stronger after his latest round of treatment. But before I could find the right moment, I received the call that would further shatter my world. Arthur had collapsed at home and was being rushed back to the hospital. By the time I arrived, he was unconscious, his body finally buckling under the strain of fighting for so long. Standing in the ICU, watching machines breathe for the boy I loved, I realized my careful plans would need to change. What I didn't know then was just how dramatically everything was about to fall apart. My family chose reputation over me. Their betrayal marked the beginning of my new path. I never got the chance to tell my parents about my pregnancy on my own terms. Instead, my mother, Serafina, found the pregnancy test while cleaning my bathroom. A positive test I had hidden at the back of my vanity drawer, wrapped in tissue paper. I had been waiting for the right moment, for Arthur to be stable enough to face my family together. That evening, I came home from the hospital to find my parents sitting rigidly at our dining room table. The overhead light cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look like strangers. The pregnancy test lay between them like evidence at a trial. "Sit down, Evelina," my father, Bartholomew, said, his voice eerily calm. I knew that tone, the one he used when his anger ran too deep for shouting. I sat, my hands trembling beneath the table. Before I could speak, before I could explain about Arthur's illness or the love behind our decision, my father erupted. "What have you done?" he shouted, slamming his fist on the table so hard the china jumped. After everything we've taught you, after all the values we've instilled, you throw it all away for what? Some teenage rebellion? Dad, please, I tried to interject. It's not what you think. Arthur is... My mother finally spoke, her voice thin and wavering. He's involved in this. We welcomed him into our home. We trusted him with our daughter. You've brought shame to this family, my father continued, his face flushing deep red. To our church. What will people say? The elder's daughter pregnant out of wedlock. I tried again. How, if you would just listen. No, you listen, he cut me off. You have two choices. You fix this problem, or you leave this house. I will not have this sinful behavior under my roof. The words hit me like physical blows. Fix this problem. As if my baby, Arthur's baby, the piece of him that would live on, was nothing more than an inconvenient mistake to be erased. I can't do that, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I won't do that. Arthur is dying. This baby might be all that's left of him. For a moment, something flickered across my father's face. Confusions, perhaps, or the first hint of understanding. But before I could continue, my brother Marcus walked in, his timing as terrible as ever. What's going on? He asked, looking between us. Your sister is pregnant, my father announced flatly, and apparently thinks keeping it is the right decision. Marcus's eyes widened, then narrowed as he looked at me. Seriously, Evelina? How could you be so selfish? Do you have any idea what this will do to Mom and Dad's reputation? To the business? His betrayal stung worse than I expected. Marcus and I had never been especially close, but I'd always believed he would have my back when it truly mattered. Instead, he sided instantly with our parents, more concerned about reputation than my well-being. Throughout this entire confrontation, my mother remained mostly silent. Her silence hurt more than my father's yelling or Marcus's accusations. She just sat there, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, offering no defense or comfort. The mother who had once bandaged my scraped knees and held me through childhood nightmares couldn't even look me in the eye. Arthur has leukemia, I finally managed to say into the hostile silence. He's dying. He might not live to see the birth. This baby is his legacy, his last wish. If you had just come to the hospital with me, talk to his doctors, you'd understand. Enough excuses, my father interrupted. Your choices are clear. Fix the situation or find somewhere else to live. I left the table in tears, retreating to my bedroom to call Arthur's parents. They had been so supportive throughout his illness, practically becoming my second family during the long hospital stays. When I told them what had happened, they immediately offered me their guest room for as long as I needed it. The next morning, I went straight to the hospital. Arthur was awake, but weak, his skin yellowish and drawn tight over his cheekbones. I hated to burden him with more stress, but I needed him to know what was happening. My parents found out about the baby, I told him, holding his fragile hand. They're making me choose between getting rid of it or leaving home. Arthur closed his eyes, a single tear sliding down his hollow cheek. I'm so sorry, Ev. This is all my fault. No, I insisted, wiping away his tear. This was our decision. A decision made from love. He tried to sit up, wincing with the effort. Tell them to come here. Let me explain. Let me take responsibility. I shook my head. They won't listen. Dad's made up his mind. Arthur laid back, exhaustion claiming him again. Just before he drifted off, he squeezed my hand. Promise me you'll keep our baby safe. Promise me you'll tell them about me someday. I promise, I whispered, kissing his forehead. Later that day, I returned home to pack my things, hoping to avoid another confrontation. But my father was waiting, sitting stiffly in the living room as if he'd been there for hours. "So, you've made your choice," he said. Not a question, but an accusation. "You're the one making choices, Dad," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "You're choosing your reputation over your daughter and grandchild. Don't you dare turn this around on me," he snapped. "You created this situation." As I moved toward the stairs, my brother Marcus blocked my path. "I went through your phone," he announced, his expression a mixture of disgust and self-righteousness. While you were at the hospital, there are no texts about Arthur having cancer. Nothing about any serious illness." My stomach dropped. "That's because we talk when I'm there, or his parents call me." "How dare you go through my private messages?" Marcus looked confused. My father defended him. "To find the truth you're obviously hiding." "The truth?" I laughed bitterly. "The truth is that none of you has bothered to ask how I feel, or to come with me to see Arthur. The truth is, you'd rather believe I'm lying than accept that your perfect daughter made a choice you don't approve of." I pushed past Marcus and ran upstairs, throwing clothes and essentials into a duffel bag with shaking hands. When I came back down, my mother was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes red-rimmed. "Evelina, please," she whispered. "Think about what you're doing." For a moment, I thought she might finally stand up for me. Might finally be the mother I desperately needed. Instead, she added, "You're throwing away your future." "No, Mom," I replied, the last of my hope dying. "I'm protecting it. Arthur is in mine." My father stood in the doorway as I walked out, his final words cutting deeper than anything that came before. If you walk out that door with this shameful secret, you're no longer my daughter." I looked him directly in the eyes, memorizing his face, somehow knowing it would be years before I saw it again. "I already stopped being your daughter the moment you stopped being my father," I replied, then walked out into the gathering darkness. Left alone, I fought for every breath. A night in my car became my first lesson in survival. 19 years old, pregnant, and utterly alone. The first few weeks after being cast out were a haze of grief and panic. I had nowhere permanent to stay and barely enough money saved from my part-time job at the library to survive. Arthur's parents had offered their guest room, but I knew it was temporary. They were already struggling with medical bills and the emotional toll of watching their son fade away. For 3 nights, I slept in my old beat-up car, parked behind the hospital where I could use the public restrooms and cafeteria. I'd curl up in the back seat, one hand protectively over my still flat stomach, whispering promises to my unborn child that somehow we would make it through. By day, I scrambled to find work, any work that would hire a pregnant teenager with no college degree and no references. I was turned away from 7 places before the Sunrise Diner on the edge of town took a chance on me. The manager, a gruff woman named Agnes, hired me as a waitress, after I broke down crying in her office. "I don't need your life story, honey," Agnes said, sliding a tissue box across the desk. "Just be on time and don't steal from the register." The diner job barely covered food and gas, so I picked up a second job stocking shelves at a convenience store from 10 at night until 2 in the morning. Between shifts, I'd visit Arthur, watching him grow weaker as the aggressive illness overtook his body. Some days he barely recognized me. Other days, he'd be lucid enough to talk about our baby and the future he wouldn't see. In my darkest hour, when hope had all but vanished, a single ray of light appeared. My co-worker at the diner, a woman named Bethany, noticed me falling asleep during breaks and quickly figured out I was living in my car. Bethany was 25, a single mother with a 4-year-old daughter named Clara. "You can't live like this," Bethany told me firmly one afternoon, "especially not pregnant." I've got a pull-out couch. It's not much, but it's better than a car back seat. I tried to refuse, embarrassed by my desperate situation, but Bethany wouldn't hear it. One mom helping another, she insisted. No arguments. Moving into Bethany's cramped one-bedroom apartment was a blessing I hadn't dared hope for. Bethany and Clara shared the bedroom while I took the living room couch. It was still a precarious existence. Bethany's landlord didn't know I was staying there, and we both knew it couldn't be permanent. But for the first time since being thrown out, I had a roof over my head and someone who truly cared. Meanwhile, Arthur's condition deteriorated rapidly. The aggressive chemotherapy that had been his last hope was stopped when his organs began to fail. His parents, Alara and Theron Finch, were models of strength and grace through it all. They never once questioned my decision about the baby, never made me feel judged for my pregnancy. "You're carrying our grandchild," Alara told me one night as we kept vigil by Arthur's bed. "You're family now, no matter what happens." The stark contrast between their unconditional acceptance and my own family's cruel rejection was painful beyond words. Sometimes I would catch myself looking at my phone, hoping for a text or call from my mother or father, some indication they'd had a change of heart. But my phone remained stubbornly silent, except for work calls and hospital updates. The financial reality of our situation became increasingly dire. Arthur had no health insurance beyond the basic coverage his parents had managed to secure, and the experimental treatments they'd pursued had drained their meager savings. I overheard Theron talking about a second mortgage on their small house, about selling their old family car to pay for palliative care. The death of my beloved left me not only pain, but an unexpected gift that changed everything. When I was 5 months pregnant, the worst happened. I was at the diner, halfway through a double shift, when Alara called. "You need to come now," she said, her voice breaking. "The doctors don't think he'll make it through the night." I abandoned my tables without explanation, driving to the hospital through a blinding rainstorm that perfectly mirrored my inner turmoil. By the time I arrived, Arthur was conscious, but barely. His breath came in labored gasps, his skin translucent and tinged yellow. The room was filled with machines that beeped and hummed, monitoring the final moments of the boy I loved. "Ev," he whispered when he saw me, his voice so faint I had to lean close to hear. "Feel!" He reached a trembling hand toward my now visible baby bump. I guided his fingers to the spot where our child had been kicking. A ghost of a smile touched his lips when he felt the movement. "Strong," he murmured. "Like you." We stayed that way for hours, his hand on my stomach, my hand over his, neither of us acknowledging what was happening. At some point, a kind nurse brought me a chair so I could sit beside the bed without letting go. Sir, just after midnight, Arthur's eyes found mine with sudden clarity. "Promise me," he said, each word a struggle. "Tell our baby about me, about us, how much I wanted to stay." "I promise," I sobbed. "Every day, they'll know everything about you." With tremendous effort, Arthur reached under his pillow and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate silver ring with a small, deep blue sapphire stone. "My grandmother's," he explained. "Want to give it to you properly before—" He slipped it onto my finger. I was too overwhelmed to speak. "On I love you, Evelina Hayes," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, as if he'd been saving his energy for these final words. "Since literature class. Always." Those were the last coherent words he spoke. By morning, Arthur Finch was gone, taking with him all our shared dreams and leaving me to carry on alone with the precious life we'd created. The funeral was a blur. I stood apart from the other mourners, my pregnancy now impossible to hide. Some of our former classmates whispered behind their hands, creating their own twisted versions of our story. Arthur's parents insisted I stand with them as family, but I could feel the judgment from others in the church. The very same church where my father was an elder, though he and my mother were notably absent. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the hospital administration. Arthur had participated in an experimental cancer treatment study, and as his next of kin, he had listed me as his fiancée on the paperwork. I was entitled to compensation for his participation. It wasn't much, $3,000, but in my desperate situation, it felt like winning the lottery. Shortly after, I went into premature labor. Alone and terrified, I called Alara Finch, who rushed me to the hospital. 26 hours of agonizing labor later, Ethan Arthur Hayes entered the world, 6 weeks early, but fighting hard to survive. He was tiny, just 5 pounds 3 ounces, with a shock of dark hair that was unmistakably Arthur's. The nurses placed him on my chest, this small miracle, with his father's chin and my nose, and I made another silent promise. No matter what it took, I would give this child the life his father and I had dreamed of. Alara and Theron were there through it all, taking photos, bringing me food, helping with overwhelming paperwork. But 2 weeks after Ethan's birth, they delivered difficult news. Theron had been offered a job in another state that they couldn't afford to turn down. "We'll send money whenever we can," Alara promised, tears in her eyes as she held Ethan one last time before their move. "And we'll visit. He's our connection to Arthur." With the Finches gone, my support system dwindled to just Bethany, who was fighting her own battles. The compensation money from the hospital study helped briefly, but between baby supplies, food, and contributing to Bethany's rent, it disappeared quickly. Postpartum depression hit me hard. There were days I could barely get out of bed. Days when Ethan's crying seemed to pierce right through my soul. I loved my son fiercely, but the combination of grief, isolation, and the overwhelming responsibility crushed me. In a moment of desperate hope, when Ethan was 3 months old, I mailed a birth announcement to my parents' address. I included a photo of Ethan in the blue blanket Arthur's mother had knitted, his eyes so like his father's, staring solemnly at the camera. On the back, I wrote simply, "Your grandson, Ethan Arthur Hayes, born December 12th. Weeks passed with no response. Finally, gathering all my courage, I drove to my parents' house one Sunday, when I knew they'd be home from church. With Ethan bundled in my arms, I walked up the familiar path to the front door, my heart pounding. My father answered. He looked older, gray, streaking his dark hair, new lines etched around his mouth. For one breathless moment, I thought I saw recognition in his eyes, perhaps even regret. Then his expression hardened. "We have nothing to say to you," he stated flatly, his gaze deliberately avoiding the baby in my arms. Before I could respond, he closed the door. I stood there on the porch, where I'd once played as a child, tears streaming down my face, my son squirming against me. It was then I noticed movement in the living room window, my mother's face, just for a second, before the curtain fell back into place. Walking back to my car, I passed my brother Marcus, getting out of his own vehicle. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. "Marcus," I started, shifting Ethan so he could see his uncle. Marcus looked from me to the baby, then over my shoulder at our parents' house. Without a word, he walked past us, pretending I was a stranger. That day marked the true beginning of my understanding that I was entirely on my own. Whatever family I would have, I would need to create myself. When everything collapsed, help came from the most unexpected place. 6 months after my failed attempt to reconnect with my family, everything fell apart at once. Bethany's landlord discovered I was living there unofficially and threatened eviction if I didn't leave immediately. That same week, Ethan developed a dangerously high fever that wouldn't break, despite over-the-counter medication. I packed our meager belongings into trash bags while Ethan wailed in his makeshift crib, his little body burning with fever. The eviction notice lay crumpled on the kitchen counter, a final reminder of how precarious our situation remained. "I'm so sorry, Evelina," Bethany said, bouncing her own daughter on her hip. "If it was just up to me..." "It's okay," I assured her, though nothing was okay. "You've done more than enough." With nowhere else to go, I loaded Ethan and our belongings into my ancient car and drove toward the emergency room. His fever had hit 103 degrees, and his listless whimpering terrified me more than his earlier screaming. Halfway to the hospital, my car made a terrible grinding noise and shuddered to a stop. Smoke billowed from under the hood as I frantically steered to the shoulder. When I tried to restart it, nothing happened. Not even a click. Sitting there on the side of the road with my sick baby in the back seat, my car dead, and nowhere to call home, something inside me finally broke. I put my head against the steering wheel and sobbed. Deep, rocking cries that came from the very center of my being. It was the culmination of everything. Arthur's death, my family's rejection, the constant struggle to survive, and now the terrifying fear that I might lose Ethan, too. "I can't do this," I whispered to no one. "I can't do this alone anymore." A tap on my window startled me out of my breakdown. Through my tears, I saw a familiar face. Mrs. Rodriguez, my high school Spanish teacher. I rolled down the window, embarrassment mixing with my desperation. "Evelina, are you all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "I was driving by and recognized your car." "My son is sick," I managed to say. "The car broke down. I was trying to get to the hospital." Mrs. Rodriguez glanced at the back seat where Ethan lay, flushed and whimpering. Without hesitation, she opened my passenger door. "Get in my car," she instructed. "I'll take you to the ER. We can deal with your car later." In the emergency room, Mrs. Rodriguez, Carmen, as she insisted I call her, stayed by my side as doctors examined Ethan. The diagnosis was an ear infection that had progressed to a dangerous point. Had we waited much longer, they told me, it could have spread to his brain. While Ethan received antibiotics through an IV, Carmen gently extracted my story: the pregnancy, Arthur's death, my family's rejection, and our current homelessness. She listened without judgment, occasionally squeezing my hand or passing me tissues. "You'll stay with me," she announced when I finished, in a tone that brooked no argument. "I have a finished basement with its own bathroom. It's not fancy, but it's clean and safe." "I can't impose like that," I protested weakly. "It's not imposing when it's offered freely," Carmen replied. "Besides, I've been rattling around that house alone since my husband passed. Some life would do it good." That night, once Ethan was stabilized and released, Carmen drove us to her modest home. The basement she mentioned was surprisingly cozy, with a daybed, a portable crib she'd somehow acquired during Ethan's treatment, and a small sitting area. "This is temporary," she told me as she showed me around. "Just until you get back on your feet. But temporary doesn't mean rushed." Thanks to the kindness of strangers, I was able not just to survive, but to build a new life. Carmen's kindness was the turning point I hadn't dared hope for. With a safe place to live and reliable childcare, Carmen insisted on watching Ethan while I worked. I could finally look beyond mere survival. "You're smart, Evelina," Carmen told me one evening as we shared dinner. Too smart to be stuck in dead-end jobs forever. What about going back to school? The idea seemed impossible at first. College had been the dream I had abandoned when life collapsed around me. But Carmen was persistent. She helped me research online nursing programs, assisted with financial aid applications, and worked out a schedule that would allow me to study while still earning enough to support Ethan. Your dream of becoming a nurse doesn't have to die with Arthur, she said. Maybe it's even more important now. Slowly, painstakingly, I built a new vision for our future. I enrolled in community college, nursing prerequisites, worked evening shifts at an assisted living facility that paid better than the diner, and cherished every moment with my growing son. Ethan was thriving under the stable routine and extra love from Grandma Carmen, as she called herself. 6 months into this new chapter, another unexpected turn occurred. A certified letter arrived addressed to me. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize, requesting I contact them regarding the estate of Arthur Finch. Confused and slightly alarmed, I called the number listed. The attorney who answered explained that Arthur had taken out a small life insurance policy during his brief period of remission, naming me and our then unborn child as beneficiaries. Additionally, because I'd say Arthur had participated in the experimental treatment trial until his death, his contribution to the resulting research had entitled Ethan to a medical trust fund. The pharmaceutical company developed a breakthrough treatment based partly on data from your fiancé's case, the lawyer explained. As part of their ethics agreement, they've established trust funds for the children of deceased participants. It wasn't accessible until Ethan turned 18, except for educational expenses, but it would cover his college completely. I sat on Carmen's floral couch, phone pressed to my ear, tears streaming down my face as the lawyer detailed amounts that seemed impossible. The life insurance wasn't a fortune, $25,000, but to me, it was freedom. The educational trust was substantial enough to ensure Ethan would never have to worry about college tuition. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, I sat alone in the backyard, gazing at stars I imagined Arthur could see too. "You're still taking care of us," I whispered to the night sky. "Still keeping your promises." With the life insurance money, I was able to focus more on my studies and less on working multiple jobs. I completed my prerequisites with a perfect GPA and was accepted into an accelerated nursing program with a single-parent scholarship. The transformation in our lives was gradual but steady. My son is living proof that even from the deepest wounds, something incredible can grow. By the time Ethan was 3, he was showing signs of exceptional intelligence, speaking in full sentences and teaching himself to read from the picture books we borrowed from the library. By 4, he was playing simple melodies on Carmen's old upright piano, his small fingers finding the notes with an intuition that brought tears to my eyes. Arthur's musical gift, living on in our son. I graduated with my nursing degree when Ethan was 5, earning highest honors and immediately receiving multiple job offers. I accepted a position at a prominent children's hospital, drawn to pediatrics because of my own journey as a young mother. The day I bought our first small house, a modest 2-bedroom cottage with a fenced yard for Ethan to play in, I stood in the empty living room and sobbed with gratitude and pride. From homelessness to home ownership in 5 years. From abandoned daughter to independent mother. From broken girl to registered nurse. Ethan ran from room to room, his excitement bubbling over. "Is this really ours, Mom?" "Forever and ever?" "Forever and ever," I promised, watching him spin with joy in the patches of sunlight streaming through our very own windows. That night, after tucking Ethan into his new bedroom, I sat on our front porch and realized something profound had shifted inside me. The constant fear, the gnawing insecurity had finally begun to recede. In its place was something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, not just for survival, but for true happiness. The years that followed our move into our first home were marked by steady growth and hard-won stability. My position at the Children's Hospital evolved from staff nurse to charge nurse, and by the time I turned 30, I was offered the role of nursing director for the oncology department, a bittersweet full circle from the days I'd spent in similar corridors with Arthur. Ethan thrived in ways that continually amazed me. His academic abilities put him 2 grades ahead of his age group, but what truly distinguished him was his musical talent. By age 10, he was playing piano concertos that college students struggled with. At 12, he composed an original piece that won a national Young Composers competition, resulting in a performance at a prestigious performing arts center in New York. Standing in that grand concert hall, watching my son take a bow as the audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation, I wished desperately that Arthur could have been there to see the incredible person our son had become. Yet somehow, I felt his presence beside me, sharing in that moment of pure pride. With my career advancement came financial security I never imagined possible. The modest cottage was replaced by a spacious 4-bedroom home in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods, ironically, just 3 miles from where I'd grown up. Our new house had a dedicated music room for Ethan, with a baby grand piano I'd saved for years to purchase. My support system had grown too. Carmen remained our rock, more grandmother to Ethan than teacher to me. Through work and Ethan's school, I had formed deep friendships with other single mothers and medical professionals who understood my journey. We created our own kind of family, gathering for holidays, supporting each other through crisis, celebrating milestones together. Alara and Theron Finch visited whenever they could, flying in from Arizona to attend Ethan's performances and spend precious time with their grandson. They brought stories and photos of Arthur that helped keep his memory alive for Ethan, who treasured every detail about the father he'd never met. "He has Arthur's hands," Alara would say, watching Ethan play piano. Those long fingers were made for music. Millions of dollars and the sudden reappearance of my family. Can the past ever be redeemed? In the spring of Ethan's 12th year, something unexpected happened that would once again alter the course of our lives. I received a formal letter from a major pharmaceutical company, the same one that had established Ethan's educational trust years earlier. The experimental treatment Arthur had participated in had led to a breakthrough drug, now saving thousands of lives. As part of a patent settlement, the families of original trial participants were being compensated for their contribution to medical science. The letter detailed a settlement amount that made me sit down in shock: $3 million, plus royalties on future sales. After consulting with financial advisors and attorneys, I established the Arthur Finch Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting young cancer patients and their families with non-medical expenses, housing, transportation, childcare. The practical needs that insurance never covers, but that can make the difference between stability and catastrophe during treatment. The Foundation's first initiative was a housing complex near the Children's Hospital, where families of pediatric cancer patients could stay free of charge during treatment. The Arthur Finch House opened on what would have been his 35th birthday, with Ethan cutting the ribbon and playing an original composition dedicated to the father he knew only through stories and photographs. Local news covered the opening, highlighting both the Foundation's mission and our personal story. The feature included photos of Ethan at his piano, interviews with families who would benefit from the housing, and a brief overview of how our journey had led to this moment of giving back. What I never expected was that this local news coverage would finally break through the wall of silence from my own family. 3 days after the broadcast, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender, Marcus Hayes, my brother. "I saw you on the news," his message began. "I've wanted to reach out for years, but didn't know how. Mom and Dad saw it too. Dad's had some health problems recently, and seeing you and Ethan, it affected him. They want to meet him, their grandson. Would you consider allowing a visit?" I stared at the screen for a long time, emotions warring within me. Anger at the years of rejection, hesitation about allowing people who had hurt me so deeply back into our lives, curiosity about what had finally changed their minds, and beneath it all, a small, persistent whisper of the girl who had once desperately wanted her family's love and approval. After 15 years, we met. The truth I had so long held captive was finally revealed. After several days of consideration and a long conversation with my therapist, a support I had maintained throughout our journey, I replied to Marcus. I wouldn't deny Ethan the chance to know his family, but there would need to be clear boundaries and honest conversations first. A cautious email exchange with Marcus revealed that my parents had indeed changed over the years. My father had suffered a heart attack the previous year, a brush with mortality that had softened his rigid perspectives. My mother, according to Marcus, had never stopped grieving the loss of her relationship with me, keeping a secret album of news clippings whenever my name appeared in hospital announcements or community events. "They were wrong," Marcus wrote in one message. "They know that now. Dad especially. He talks about you when he thinks no one is listening, about how proud he is of what you've accomplished on your own." We arranged for them to visit my home the following month. I spent weeks preparing, not just the house, but myself and Ethan as well. I explained to my son, now old enough to understand complex family dynamics, about the grandparents he had never met and why they had been absent from our lives. Are they bad people?" he asked with the direct simplicity of children. "No," I answered after careful thought. "They're people who made bad choices because they were afraid and stuck in old ways of thinking. But people can change, and we're going to see if they have." As the day of their visit approached, I alternated between anxiety and a strange calm. The life I had built was solid, successful, and fulfilling. Whatever happened with my family of origin, Ethan and I would be okay. This realization gave me a strength I hadn't possessed during our last encounter, the strength that comes from knowing your own worth. The day my family was scheduled to visit, I found myself rearranging flowers for the third time, smoothing invisible wrinkles from sofa cushions, and checking the oven, though lunch wouldn't be served for hours. Ethan watched my nervous energy with amusement. "Mom, the house is perfect," he said, placing his hand on my arm. "And so are we." His maturity at 13 sometimes took my breath away. In many ways, he'd had to grow up faster than other children, aware from an early age of our complicated history and the absence of traditional family structures in his life. Yet rather than making him bitter, these challenges had fostered in him an extraordinary empathy and wisdom. At precisely noon, a car pulled into our circular driveway. From the window, I watched my parents and brother emerge, their movements hesitant as they took in the impressive facade of our home. My father, Bartholomew, looked much older than his 62 years, leaning heavily on a cane, his once commanding presence diminished. My mother, Serafina, appeared frozen in time, her hair still the same styled bob, though now completely gray. Marcus stood between them, clearly the physical support they both needed. "They're here," I said to Ethan, who sat at the piano, his fingers silently tracing patterns on the keys. a nervous habit he developed whenever he felt anxious. "Should I play something?" he asked, his voice smaller than usual. "Just be yourself," I told him, squeezing his shoulder. That's more than enough." I opened the front door before they could ring the bell, wanting to control this first moment of reunion. There was an awkward pause as we all simply stared at each other across the threshold of worlds that had been separate for 15 years. "Evelina," my mother finally whispered, her eyes filling with tears. "You look beautiful." "Please, come in," I replied, neither accepting nor rejecting the compliment. Stepping aside to allow them entry, they filed into the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and crystal chandelier, their eyes widening as they took in the evidence of our success. On the wall hung Ethan's awards and certificates alongside photographs of our life. Ethan at his piano recital, the two of us on vacation, the opening of the Arthur Finch house. Prominently displayed among these was a professional portrait of Arthur from before his illness, his smile radiant and full of the life that had been cut short. My father's gaze locked on this photo, his complexion paling noticeably. "Is that—" he began. "Arthur Finch," I confirmed, "Ethan's father." As if on cue, Ethan stepped into the foyer from the adjacent music room. The effect on my family was immediate and profound. My mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. My father seemed to sway slightly, gripping his cane tighter. Even Marcus, who had seen photos of Ethan from the news coverage, looked stunned. The reason was obvious to anyone with eyes. Ethan, at 13, was the spitting image of Arthur at the same age. The same soulful brown eyes, the same defined jawline, even the same way of standing with his weight shifted slightly to one side. The only features he seemed to have inherited from me were my straight nose, and the dimple in his left cheek when he offered a tentative smile. "Hello," he said politely, extending his hand the way I'd taught him. "I'm Ethan Hayes. It's nice to meet you." My father moved forward first, his hand trembling slightly as he took Ethan's. "I'm Bartholomew," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your grandfather." The simple introduction, acknowledging the relationship he had denied for so long, nearly broke my carefully maintained composure. My mother stepped forward next, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I'm Serafina," she managed, "your grandmother. May I hug you?" Ethan looked to me for guidance. I nodded slightly, leaving the choice to him. He stepped forward and allowed my mother to embrace him, awkwardly patting her back in the endearingly formal way teenagers do when unsure about physical affection. "Let's sit down," I suggested, leading everyone to the living room with its wall of windows overlooking the garden. "We have a lot to talk about." Once seated, an uncomfortable silence descended. Ethan, sensing the tension, spoke first. "Would you like to hear me play something?" he offered. "Mom says music makes difficult conversations easier." Without waiting for a response, he moved to the piano in the corner of the room and began to play. Not one of the complex classical pieces he had mastered, but a simple, haunting melody he had composed himself. The notes filled the room, creating a poignant soundtrack to the emotional scene unfolding. "Arthur played cello," I said quietly as Ethan continued. "He was accepted to the conservatory before he got sick." "Sick?" my father repeated, the question hanging heavy in the air. It was time for the truth they had refused to hear 15 years ago. With Ethan's music as a backdrop, I finally told them everything about Arthur's leukemia diagnosis after graduation, about his fear of leaving nothing behind, about our decision to create a child together before he died, about his final days and the promises we made to each other. He never got to meet Ethan, I concluded, my voice steady, despite the pain of recounting these memories. He died knowing he was leaving us a piece of himself, but not knowing if we would be okay. My father's face had transformed during my story, the stern patriarch replaced by a broken man confronting the magnitude of his mistake. My mother sobbed quietly into a handkerchief, occasionally looking up at Ethan at the piano as if trying to memorize his features. "We didn't know," my father finally said, his voice barely audible, "about the illness. We thought—" "I tried to tell you," I replied without accusation, simply stating fact. "Multiple times. You wouldn't listen." "No," he acknowledged, lowering his head. "We wouldn't." Marcus, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "When I went through your phone that day, I was looking for proof you were lying. I wanted you to be lying, because it was easier than accepting what was happening. I didn't find texts about Arthur's illness, so I convinced myself and Mom and Dad that you were making it up." "What happened after?" my mother asked, her voice small. After you left?" I told them then about the struggles, the nights in my car, the multiple jobs, the premature birth, the desperate poverty. I told them about Arthur's parents' kindness and their eventual move to Arizona. About Carmen Rodriguez finding me broken down on the side of the road with a feverish baby. About slowly rebuilding a life through education, hard work, and the unexpected blessing of Arthur's life insurance and the pharmaceutical settlement. Throughout my account, I noticed my father growing increasingly pale, his breathing labored. When I described standing on their doorstep with baby Ethan, only to be turned away, he closed his eyes as if in physical pain. "I remember that day," my mother interjected, her voice thick with regret. "I saw you through the window. I wanted to run out, to see my grandson, but I was a coward. And I walked past you like you were a stranger," Marcus added. "My own sister and nephew." Ethan had stopped playing, and now sat beside me on the sofa, his hand finding mine. His presence gave me strength to ask the question that had lingered for 15 years. "Why now?" I asked simply. "Why reach out after all this time?" My father cleared his throat, his eyes watery. "The heart attack last year. It makes you think about what matters, what you've lost, what you might never get to make right." He paused, struggling visibly. "Then we saw you on the news, with the foundation named for Arthur, and Ethan playing the piano. I realized what my pride had cost us all. Years we can never get back." "We're not asking for forgiveness," my mother added quickly. "We don't deserve that. We just wanted a chance to meet Ethan, to acknowledge our terrible mistake, and to tell you how incredibly proud we are of the woman you've become without any help from us." I felt Ethan squeeze my hand, a silent show of support. "I didn't do it completely alone," I corrected gently. "Arthur's parents helped when they could. Mrs. Rodriguez gave us a home when we had nothing. Friends became family when my own family wasn't there. And you had me," Ethan added with a small smile. "Yes," I agreed, returning his smile. "I always had you." An awkward silence fell again, broken when Ethan stood suddenly. "Atar, I'm going to get the photo albums," he announced. "You should see what you missed." Once he left the room, I addressed my family directly. "I'm willing to try building a relationship moving forward, but there need to be boundaries. Ethan is my priority. He's known about you his whole life, but he's also known why you weren't in our lives. If you want to be grandparents and uncle to him now, it needs to be consistent and unconditional." "Anything," my father said immediately. "Whatever terms you set." "We'll start slow," I decided. "Dinners, occasional visits. We'll see how it goes." Ethan returned with several photo albums and his school portfolio. I want to show you something first, he said, opening to a certificate emblazoned with a prestigious music school's logo. I got accepted to the pre-college program. Just like my dad. My parents exchanged a look of astonishment before my father spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Your father would be incredibly proud of you, Ethan. As are we. For the first time since they arrived, I felt something in my heart shift. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the first step toward healing. As Ethan began showing them photographs, narrating the story of our life together, I excused myself to check on lunch, needing a moment alone to process the swirling emotions. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter and took a deep breath. Through the doorway, I could hear Ethan's animated voice, explaining his compositions, my mother's gentle questions, my father's amazed responses, the sound of family, broken, imperfect, but perhaps not beyond repair. I touched the sapphire ring I still wore on a chain around my neck, Arthur's grandmother's ring that he'd given me on his deathbed. We're okay, I whispered, a message to him across whatever divide separated us. We made it. And maybe, just maybe, our family is finding its way back to us too. Forgiveness is a process. Atonement is a long journey. But for the sake of the future, we are willing to take it. The months following that first difficult reunion brought gradual, cautious steps toward rebuilding family connections. I maintained firm boundaries, refusing to pretend the past hadn't happened while still allowing space for new relationships to form. My parents and brother earned their places in our lives slowly, through consistent presence and genuine effort. Our first Thanksgiving together was awkward, but meaningful. Ethan insisted on saying grace, thanking God for second chances and the courage to take them. Around the table sat not only my parents and brother, but also Carmen Rodriguez, colleagues from the hospital who had become dear friends, and Arthur's parents, who had flown in specially for the occasion. It was a rich tapestry of relationships, some forged in blood, others in shared struggle and love. Alara and Theron Finch meeting my parents for the first time could have been tense, but Alara's gracious nature prevailed. We've all lost time with this wonderful boy, she told my mother, while watching Ethan demonstrate a complex piano piece for his grandfathers. Let's not waste any more. Family therapy became part of our journey. Sometimes just me and my parents, sometimes including Ethan or Marcus. In those sessions, painful truths were spoken aloud that had festered in silence for years. I was more concerned with what the church elders would think than with what my daughter needed, my father admitted during one particularly raw session. I chose reputation over love, and it was the greatest mistake of my life. My mother revealed that she had kept a secret box of newspaper clippings about me. Graduation announcements from nursing school, community awards, anything she could find. That mentioned my name. I was too weak to stand up to your father then, she confessed. But I never stopped loving you or wondering about my grandson. These admissions didn't erase the pain of abandonment, but they helped me understand that my parents were deeply flawed humans who had made terrible choices, not monsters incapable of love. This understanding was crucial to my own healing. My relationship with Marcus evolved more quickly than with my parents. As adults, we discovered common ground we'd never found as children. His wife and 3 daughters welcomed Ethan as cousin and nephew, creating the extended family connections he had always longed for. Through all these developments, I maintained the life and independence I had built. My career continued to advance, with a promotion to Chief Nursing Officer of the Pediatric Hospital. The Arthur Finch Foundation expanded its reach, opening a second family housing center and establishing a scholarship program for young musicians facing medical challenges. My story is proof that the greatest blessings can emerge from the deepest wounds. Ethan, now 14, was thriving in the pre-college program, commuting to New York City each weekend for intensive training. His composition, Legacy, inspired by the father he never met, was selected for performance by a major Philharmonic's Young Composer Showcase, an almost unheard of honor for someone his age. On the night of the performance, our extended family filled an entire row at the Performing Arts Center. My parents, frail but determined to be present, Marcus and his family, Carmen Rodriguez, Arthur's parents, my closest friends from work. As Ethan took the stage, looking so much like Arthur that it sometimes stole my breath, I felt the fullness of the journey we had traveled. The piece began with a single, mournful cello note, Ethan's tribute to his father's instrument, before expanding into a complex dialogue between piano and orchestra. The music told our story more eloquently than words ever could. Loss and struggle giving way to resilience, pain transforming into beauty, isolation blossoming into community. As the final notes faded and the audience erupted in applause, I touched the sapphire ring I still wore around my neck on special occasions. In that moment, I could almost feel Arthur beside me, witnessing the miracle of our son and the life we had created from the ashes of broken dreams. Later that night, in the quiet of our hotel room, Ethan asked a question that caught me off guard. Are you ever going to forgive Grandpa and Grandma completely? I considered his question carefully. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Ethan. It's a process. I've forgiven enough to allow them in our lives, to appreciate who they are now, while not forgetting what happened. That's the forgiveness I have to give right now. He nodded thoughtfully. Arthur would want you to be happy. That's what you always tell me about him. He would, I agreed. And I am happy, incredibly happy. It was true. The path to this moment had been unimaginably difficult, filled with pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. Yet that same painful journey had forged me into someone stronger, more compassionate, and more purposeful than I might otherwise have become. It had taught me that family isn't only defined by blood, but by who stays when the world falls apart. It had shown me that my worth wasn't determined by others' acceptance, but by my own resilience and choices. Most importantly, it had given me Ethan, the living embodiment of love that transcends even death, the daily reminder that sometimes our greatest blessings emerge from our deepest wounds. The following spring, on the 15th anniversary of Arthur's death, we held a memorial concert at the Foundation building. Ethan performed alongside professional musicians who had donated their time, raising funds for the next family housing project. My parents attended, my father now in a wheelchair, but his mind still sharp, my mother hovering protectively nearby. After the concert, as guests mingled at the reception, my father motioned me to a quiet corner. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice wavering with age and emotion. Something I should have said years ago. I sat beside him, noticing how time had softened the once intimidating man who had ruled my childhood with rigid certainty. I was wrong, he said simply. Not just about throwing you out, but about everything I taught you about conditional love. Real love, God's love, doesn't depend on perfect behavior or meeting expectations. It persists through mistakes and differences. I failed to show you that kind of love, and it's my greatest regret. I took his weathered hand in mine. We can't change the past, Dad. No, he agreed, but I want you to know that I see you now, Evelina. I see the remarkable woman you are, the extraordinary mother you've become, without any example from us. And I am so very proud to be your father, even though I didn't earn that right. Those words, the acknowledgement and apology I had once desperately needed, washed over me with unexpected healing power. They couldn't erase 15 years of absence, but they closed a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. Life continues to unfold in ways I never could have predicted. Our family relationships remain complicated, but genuine. My career and the foundation provide purpose beyond myself. Ethan grows more into his own person each day, carrying Arthur's legacy forward while creating his own. I've learned that our stories don't follow neat, predictable patterns. Sometimes the people who should love us unconditionally fail us completely. Sometimes strangers become saviors. Sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the foundation for our greatest strengths. Most importantly, I've learned that we don't have to be defined by who walks away from us, but rather by how we choose to walk forward. Each of us has the power to write our own story, to transform rejection into resilience, abandonment into independence, and pain into purpose.